In a quiet suburban neighborhood where the streets were lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and pristine lawns, life moved at a predictable pace. Everyone knew each other, at least enough to wave hello or exchange pleasantries over coffee. But beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic community lay simmering tensions. Among the residents was Sarah, a soft-spoken woman in her late 30s who loved gardening more than anything else. Her husband, Mark, shared her passion for creating beauty in their backyard. Together, they had transformed their modest home into something truly special. Their garden was the envy of the block, filled with vibrant flowers, lush greenery, and even a small vegetable patch. But not everyone appreciated their efforts. Enter Karen, the self-appointed queen bee of the Homeowners Association HOA. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the kind of person who carried a clipboard everywhere she went and treated the HOA handbook like it was holy scripture. She prided herself on enforcing every rule, no matter how trivial, and had earned a reputation for being nosy, bossy, and downright relentless. Whether it was reminding people to park their cars correctly or sending passive-aggressive notes about holiday decorations left up too long, Karen made sure everyone stayed in line, or else. Sarah and Mark tried their best to stay out of Karen's crosshairs. They followed all the rules, kept their property tidy, and avoided stirring up trouble. Still, they couldn't shake the feeling that Karen watched them closely, always looking for an excuse to pounce. It wasn't paranoia. It was fact. Neighbors whispered about how Karen seemed particularly fixated on Sarah and Mark's house, often muttering under her breath whenever she walked past their yard. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah decided to spend some quality time tending to her roses. She wore her favorite wide-brimmed hat and gloves, humming softly as she worked. Mark joined her later, mowing the lawn and trimming the edges with meticulous care. The air smelled sweet, and birds chirped cheerfully in the background. For once, everything felt peaceful. That is, until the peace was shattered by a loud thud from somewhere near their fence. Startled, Sarah dropped her pruning shears and rushed toward the sound, with Mark close behind. What they saw when they rounded the corner left them speechless. There, sprawled awkwardly on the ground beside a toppled aluminum ladder, was none other than Karen. Her face was red with embarrassment, and one hand clutched her ankle, which looked swollen and painful. Beside her lay a pair of binoculars glinting in the sunlight. "What happened?" Sarah asked, genuinely concerned despite her shock. I slipped," Karen stammered, clearly flustered. "I was just checking if your trees were encroaching on public space." Mark raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Encroaching, really? From the looks of things, Karen hadn't been casually inspecting anything. She'd been spying. And judging by the position of the ladder, she'd placed it right against their fence to get a better view of their yard. Why else would she need binoculars? Despite the absurdity of the situation, Sarah offered Karen a hand to help her up. But Karen waved her off, wincing as she tried to stand on her own. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, brushing dirt off her clothes. Then, almost defensively, she added, "You should know better than to let your plants grow so wildly. It's distracting." "Distracting?" Mark echoed, incredulous. "Our garden is hardly wild. We take pride in keeping it neat." Karen shot him a glare but didn't respond. Instead, she limped away, muttering something about filing a complaint with the HOA. As soon as she disappeared around the corner, Sarah turned to Mark, shaking her head. "Did she really just fall off a ladder while spying on us?" Mark chuckled dryly. "Looks like it. Honestly, I'm surprised she hasn't done this sooner." For the rest of the day, the incident weighed heavily on their minds. Sure, Karen, falling off a ladder was amusing in its own bizarre way, but it also raised questions. Why was she so obsessed with their yard? Was she really trying to find fault, or was there something deeper going on? Little did they know this clumsy accident would be the spark that ignited a much larger fire. Over the next few days, whispers spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened. Some found it hilarious, imagining Karen teetering precariously before crashing to the ground. Others felt bad for her, though few dared say so aloud. After all, Karen wasn't exactly known for her kindness or generosity. If anything, most residents secretly resented her constant meddling. But for Sarah and Mark, the laughter and gossip weren't comforting. Something about the whole ordeal felt off. They couldn't shake the image of those binoculars lying on the grass, abandoned like evidence of a crime. Had Karen been watching them for longer than they realized? Was this just another attempt to nitpick their lives, or was there a bigger motive behind her actions? As the days passed, strange things began happening. Their mailbox, usually empty except for bills and junk mail, started filling up with anonymous notes. At first, the messages were vague: keep your yard under control, or mind your own business. But soon they grew more menacing. One note read, stop digging where you shouldn't, while another warned, some secrets are better left buried. Sarah and Mark exchanged worried glances. Was someone trying to scare them into silence? Or was this Karen's way of retaliating after her embarrassing fall? Either way, it was clear that whatever peace they'd enjoyed before was now gone. To make matters worse, they noticed unfamiliar cars parked along their street at odd hours. Strangers lingered outside their house, pretending to admire the landscaping, but occasionally glancing toward their windows. Mark suggested installing security cameras, and Sarah agreed. Better safe than sorry, they reasoned. What they captured on camera shocked them. Late at night, Karen could be seen sneaking around their property, snapping photos of their trash cans, jotting down notes about their comings and goings, and even recording snippets of conversations held outdoors. It was obsessive and deeply unsettling. Sarah felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone invade their privacy like this? And why? What had they ever done to deserve such treatment? More importantly, how far was Karen willing to go to maintain her twisted version of control? Little did Sarah and Mark know this discovery was only the beginning. What started as a minor inconvenience, a nosy neighbor falling off a ladder, was about to spiral into something far more complicated. Their quiet suburban life was about to change forever, and there was no turning back. The discovery of Karen's late-night activities sent a chill down Sarah and Mark's spines. They sat together in their living room, staring at the grainy footage on their laptop screen. The images were unmistakable. Karen creeping around their yard, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she snapped pictures, scribbled notes, and occasionally paused to listen intently to their conversations. It wasn't just nosiness, it was an invasion of their privacy. Something far more sinister than they'd ever imagined. Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. "What does she think she's doing? This isn't just about HOA rules anymore." Sarah nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "It feels like she's building a case against us. But for what? We haven't done anything wrong." "Exactly," Mark replied. "And that's what makes it so creepy. She's not looking for proof. We're not guilty of breaking any rules. She's just watching us like we're some kind of experiment." The realization hit them both at the same time. Karen wasn't just obsessed with enforcing HOA guidelines. She had turned their lives into her personal project. Every detail mattered to her. Their gardening habits, their trash schedule, even the way they spoke to each other outside. It was as if she believed uncovering some hidden flaw would justify her fixation. Determined to get answers, Sarah decided to dig deeper. She began by reviewing old emails from the HOA mailing list, searching for anything unusual. At first glance, the messages seemed mundane: reminders about annual dues, updates on community events, and polite requests to keep noise levels down after 10 p.m. But as Sarah scrolled further back, she noticed patterns that made her stomach churn. Karen frequently singled out certain neighbors in these emails, pointing out minor infractions or questioning their contributions to the neighborhood. One email accused a family of leaving their recycling bins out too long, while another criticized a homeowner for painting their front door without prior approval. In every instance, Karen's tone was sharp and accusatory, dripping with thinly veiled hostility. But one thread stood out above the rest. Tucked away among dozens of innocuous messages was a series of exchanges between Karen and several HOA board members discussing financial matters. At first glance, the conversation appeared routine: budget proposals, upcoming repairs, fundraising ideas. However, upon closer inspection, Sarah spotted inconsistencies. Large sums of money were being allocated to projects that never materialized, and vague references to consultants and emergency funds raised red flags. Curiosity turned to suspicion when Sarah noticed repeated mentions of a company called Greenscape Landscaping. According to the emails, Greenscape had been awarded multiple contracts for landscaping work throughout the neighborhood. Yet Sarah couldn't recall seeing any significant improvements in recent years. When she searched online for information about the company, she found almost nothing: a generic website with stock photos and no contact details beyond a P.O. box. Her heart raced as she pieced things together. Could Karen be using her position within the HOA to funnel money into fake projects? Was this why she was so adamant about controlling everyone's yards, to cover up her schemes? Sarah shared her findings with Mark, who listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "If this is true," he said slowly, "then Karen's behavior makes sense. She's not just spying on us because she's nosy. She's scared we'll find out what she's really up to." "But why us?" Sarah asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why target our house specifically?" Mark hesitated before answering. "Maybe it's because we stand out. Our garden is different from everyone else's. It's thriving, vibrant. Maybe she sees it as a threat to whatever image she wants to maintain." The idea was unsettling but plausible. Karen thrived on control, and anything that deviated from her vision of perfection likely set off alarm bells in her mind. Still, knowing the reason didn't make the situation any easier to handle. If anything, it added weight to their growing burden. Determined to confront Karen, Sarah and Mark gathered all the evidence they had: the security footage, the suspicious emails, and even a few witness accounts from neighbors who had noticed Karen's odd behavior. Armed with this arsenal, they attended the next HOA meeting, determined to expose the truth. The gathering took place in the community center, a small, windowless room with fluorescent lighting that gave everything a sterile feel. As usual, Karen presided over the meeting, seated at the head of a long folding table. Her clipboard rested neatly in front of her, and her posture radiated authority. Several other board members flanked her, nodding along as she reviewed the agenda. When it came time for open discussion, Sarah stood up, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "I'd like to address something that's been bothering me, and I think it's affecting others in the neighborhood as well." All eyes turned to her, including Karen's, whose expression hardened immediately. "Go ahead," Karen said, curtly, though her tone suggested she already knew where this was heading. Sarah took a deep breath. "We've noticed some irregularities regarding how funds are being managed within the HOA. For example, there have been payments made to a company called Greenscape Landscaping, yet we haven't seen any tangible results from those investments. Additionally, there's been a pattern of targeting specific residents like myself and my husband, with accusations that seem baseless." A murmur rippled through the room as neighbors exchanged glances. Some looked intrigued, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen, however, remained impassive, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark stepped in, holding up his phone. "We also have video evidence showing unauthorized surveillance of private properties. Specifically, ours." He played a clip of Karen sneaking around their yard, capturing her actions in stark detail. Gasps erupted from the crowd and Karen's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous!" she exclaimed, slamming her palm on the table. "You're twisting facts to paint me in a bad light. I'm simply doing my duty as HOA president to ensure compliance with regulations." Her defense fell flat. Neighbors began speaking up, sharing their own experiences of feeling targeted or unfairly treated by Karen. One woman recounted how Karen had fined her for hanging Christmas lights past January 15th, despite no such rule existing in the handbook. Another man described receiving threatening letters demanding he repaint his fence, even though it was in perfect condition. As the meeting descended into chaos, it became clear that Karen's reign of control was crumbling. People who had once feared her now saw her for what she truly was, a bully hiding behind a mask of authority. Though she tried to regain order, her attempts only fueled the fire of dissent. By the end of the night, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. What started as a quiet suburban meeting had transformed into a reckoning. For the first time in years, residents felt empowered to speak their minds, united by a shared desire for transparency and fairness. And though Karen refused to step down from her position, her grip on the neighborhood was slipping fast. For Sarah and Mark, the victory felt bittersweet. They had exposed the truth, but at a cost. Their peaceful life had been disrupted, and trust within the community was fractured. Yet amid the turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged. Perhaps, just perhaps, this moment marked the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild their neighborhood on a foundation of honesty and cooperation, rather than fear and manipulation. The days following the explosive HOA meeting felt like living in a pressure cooker. The once quiet neighborhood buzzed with tension, whispers, and accusations. What had started as a personal vendetta between Karen and Sarah and Mark had morphed into something much larger, a full-blown community crisis. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves were now divided into two camps: those who supported Sarah and Mark's revelations about Karen's misconduct, and those who clung to the status quo, unwilling to believe that their trusted HOA president could be capable of such deceit. Karen, for her part, refused to go down without a fight. She doubled down on her defenses, sending out lengthy emails to the entire neighborhood, accusing Sarah and Mark of fabricating lies to tarnish her reputation. "They're trying to undermine our community," one email read. "Don't let them destroy everything we've worked so hard to build." Her words struck a chord with some residents, especially older ones who valued order above all else. To them, Sarah and Mark's actions felt like an attack on the very fabric of their suburban paradise, but not everyone was convinced. Many neighbors began to see Karen in a new light, questioning her motives and scrutinizing her past behavior. Conversations that had once revolved around weekend barbecues and school events now centered on suspicious financial transactions, unexplained landscaping contracts, and Karen's obsessive need for control. Some even admitted they'd always felt uneasy around her, but had been too afraid to speak up. Sarah found herself fielding phone calls and messages from curious or outraged neighbors. One woman confided that she'd received a hefty fine years ago for planting flowers that didn't match Karen's approved color palette. Another man revealed he'd been pressured into hiring greenscape landscaping after Karen threatened to withhold approval for his home renovation plans. Each story added another layer to the web of corruption Karen had woven over the years. Despite the growing support, the backlash against Sarah and Mark was intense. Anonymous notes continued to appear in their mailbox, escalating in tone. One read, "You'll regret crossing her," while another warned, "No one will protect you." Their car tires were slashed overnight, leaving them stranded until they could replace them. Worst of all, crude graffiti appeared on their garage. There one morning scrawled in bold red paint, "Liars." Mark stood staring at the vandalism, his jaw clenched. "This is getting out of hand," he said through gritted teeth. "We can't keep letting her get away with this." Sarah nodded, though fear gnawed at her insides. "I know, but what choice do we have? If we back down now, she wins, and nothing changes." Determined to push forward, Sarah reached out to local journalists, hoping to bring attention to the scandal. She knew exposing Karen's misdeeds publicly would be risky, but it might also force accountability where none had existed before. After several phone calls and meetings, a reporter from a regional newspaper agreed to investigate. Armed with Sarah and Mark's evidence, the journalist began digging deeper, interviewing neighbors, reviewing HOA records, and tracing the mysterious payments to Greenscape Landscaping. Meanwhile, Karen launched a counter-offensive. She held impromptu meetings with her loyal supporters, rallying them to defend her leadership. "They're trying to ruin this neighborhood," she declared during one gathering, pacing dramatically in front of a small group of attendees. "If we let them win, it sets a dangerous precedent. Next thing you know, people will ignore the rules entirely, and our community will fall apart." Her rhetoric resonated with some, particularly those who feared change or distrusted outsiders. A handful of vocal defenders emerged, spreading rumors about Sarah and Mark to discredit them. One neighbor claimed they'd heard Sarah bragging about wanting to take over the HOA, while another accused Mark of secretly filming Karen without consent, despite the fact that their security cameras were installed legally. These falsehoods spread quickly, sowing doubt among undecided residents. The division within the neighborhood grew palpable. Once friendly faces turned cold when Sarah and Mark walked by. Children who used to play together stopped inviting each other over. Block parties were canceled, citing logistical issues, though everyone knew the real reason. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with hostility and mistrust. Yet amidst the chaos, cracks in Karen's armor began to show. The investigative reporter uncovered damning evidence linking Karen directly to the fraudulent activities. Bank statements revealed large sums of money funneled from HOA accounts into offshore accounts under aliases. Emails showed Greenscape Landscaping was a shell company registered to Karen's brother-in-law, who conveniently lived out of state. And interviews with contractors confirmed that many of the supposed projects funded by the HOA never actually took place. When the story broke, it sent shockwaves through the community. Headlines blared across newspapers and websites. HOA president accused of embezzlement, suburban scandal rocks quiet neighborhood, and residents rally against corruption. The article included excerpts from the emails, photos of the fake invoices, and quotes from disgruntled neighbors who finally felt safe speaking out. For Sarah and Mark, the exposure brought both relief and anxiety. On one hand, they no longer bore the burden of carrying the truth alone. The weight of proof had shifted onto the shoulders of professional investigators and reporters. On the other hand, the spotlight intensified the threats against them. Strangers drove slowly past their house at night, peering through their windows. Someone egged their front door, leaving streaks of dried yolk smeared across the wood. Even walking to the mailbox felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Through it all, Sarah and Mark leaned on each other for strength. They reminded themselves why they'd started this fight in the first place, not just for justice but for the future of their neighborhood. They envisioned a community where kindness trumped control, where collaboration replaced coercion. It was a lofty dream, but one worth fighting for. As the scandal unfolded, Karen's grip on power weakened further. More neighbors joined the movement to hold her accountable, signing petitions demanding an independent audit of HOA finances. Others called for her immediate resignation, arguing that her presence poisoned the atmosphere of trust needed for any meaningful reconciliation. Even some of her staunchest supporters began distancing themselves, realizing they'd been complicit in enabling her toxic behavior. Still, Karen dug in her heels, refusing to relinquish her title. She gave tearful interviews to local news outlets, portraying herself as a victim of jealousy and misinformation. "I've dedicated my life to this neighborhood," she sobbed during one televised segment, "and this is how I'm repaid? With lies and betrayal?" Her theatrics failed to sway public opinion. As more details emerged, her credibility crumbled. The HOA board, under mounting pressure, suspended her pending an official investigation. For the first time in years, Karen was powerless, and she hated every second of it. While Sarah and Mark celebrated these small victories, they couldn't help but feel drained. Their lives had become consumed by this battle, leaving little room for anything else. Friends outside the neighborhood stopped calling, unsure of how to navigate the drama. Family members urged them to move away, suggesting they start fresh, somewhere less fraught with conflict. But Sarah and Mark resisted. Running wasn't the answer. Standing their ground was. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Mark with a wistful smile. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" she asked. "How excited we were to plant our garden and make this place home." Mark nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, we thought we'd found our little slice of heaven." "Well," Sarah said softly, "maybe we still can. This storm won't last forever. Someday things will settle down and we'll rebuild. Not just our yard, but the whole neighborhood." Mark squeezed her hand, offering a rare moment of optimism. "Yeah, maybe someday this will all feel worth it." Though the road ahead remained uncertain, One thing was clear. The quiet suburban life they'd once cherished was gone for good. In its place stood a fractured yet resilient community, grappling with truths long buried and learning, painfully, that healing required courage, patience, and unity. And while Karen's fall from grace marked the beginning of the end, it also signaled the dawn of possibility, a chance to rewrite the rules and redefine what it meant to truly belong. The aftermath of the scandal hit the neighborhood like a tidal wave, washing away years of carefully constructed facades and exposing the cracks beneath. What had once been a tight-knit community now felt fractured, its foundation shaken by revelations that no one could ignore. For Sarah and Mark, the fight against Karen's corruption wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. The backlash they faced grew more intense with each passing day, testing their resolve in ways they never imagined. Karen, though stripped of her official duties pending investigation, remained a shadow looming over everything. She refused to go quietly into the night. Instead, she became even more brazen, rallying her dwindling group of loyalists and launching smear campaigns to discredit anyone who dared oppose her. Flyers appeared on doorsteps overnight, accusing Sarah and Mark of being troublemakers and outsiders bent on destroying the neighborhood's harmony. Some neighbors tore up the flyers without reading them, but others hesitated, their trust wavering under the weight of fear and doubt. One particularly vicious flyer stood out. It featured a grainy photo of Sarah and Mark's house, circled in, red with bold letters proclaiming, "They're not one of us." The message was clear. Karen wanted to paint them as outsiders, unworthy of belonging. It stung deeply, not because it was true, but because it tapped into an age-old fear of rejection. Sarah found herself staring at the flyer late at night, wondering if they'd made a mistake by speaking out. Would things ever return to normal, or had they permanently altered the fabric of their lives? Mark tried to reassure her. "We're doing the right thing," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed hints of exhaustion. "People might be scared now, but eventually they'll see the truth. They have to." But seeing the truth took time, and patience was wearing thin. Anonymous threats escalated. Someone left a dead rat on their doorstep, a grotesque symbol of intimidation. Another night, their garden lights were smashed, plunging their backyard into darkness. Even their beloved rose bushes weren't spared. Someone hacked at them with pruning shears, leaving jagged stems where vibrant blooms used to thrive. Each act of vandalism felt like a personal attack, a reminder that standing up to power came at a cost. Despite the hostility, Sarah and Mark refused to back down. They began documenting every incident meticulously, filing police reports and sharing updates with the investigative journalist covering the story. Their determination inspired a few brave neighbors to step forward, offering support in small but meaningful ways. One elderly woman baked cookies for them, leaving them on their porch with a note that read, "Thank you for fighting for us." A young couple offered to help install motion-activated floodlights around their property to deter vandals. These gestures, though modest, gave Sarah and Mark hope that kindness hadn't entirely vanished from their community. Meanwhile, the media coverage continued to grow. The scandal attracted attention far beyond the confines of their suburban enclave, drawing reporters from larger outlets eager to uncover the full extent of Karen's misconduct. Interviews with disgruntled residents painted a damning picture of life under her leadership. Stories poured in about fines levied for trivial infractions, demands for unnecessary repairs, and outright bullying tactics designed to keep everyone in line. One man recounted how Karen had pressured him to sell his home after he refused to comply with her unreasonable landscaping requests. Another shared how she'd threatened legal action when he questioned her authority during an HOA meeting. The narrative shifted. Public opinion began to turn decisively against Karen. Social media played a pivotal role, amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Neighbors created private groups to share experiences and strategize next steps. Hashtags like #ComeExposeKaren and FairHOA trended locally, drawing attention to grassroots efforts to reform the organization. For the first time, people felt empowered to speak openly about the dysfunction that had plagued their community for years. But while the tide seemed to be turning, Karen fought back with everything she had. She hired a high-profile lawyer to defend her, claiming she was the victim of a witch hunt orchestrated by jealous neighbors. Her attorney released statements portraying her as a misunderstood leader who simply cared too much about maintaining standards. Karen is a perfectionist, the statement read. Her dedication to excellence has been misinterpreted as tyranny, but those who know her understand her heart is in the right place. The spin worked on some, particularly older residents who valued tradition and order above all else. They clung to the idea that Karen's methods, however harsh, were necessary to preserve the neighborhood's integrity. Others, however, saw through the rhetoric, recognizing it for what it was: a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Amid the chaos, the independent audit of HOA finances revealed shocking details. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had disappeared over the years, funneled into shell companies and offshore accounts linked directly to Karen and her family. Greenscape Landscaping, once touted as a reputable contractor, was exposed as a front operation run by Karen's brother-in-law. Dozens of invoices for non-existent projects lined her desk, each signed off with her approval. The evidence was irrefutable, leaving little room for denial. When the findings were presented at a special HOA meeting, the room erupted in outrage. Even some of Karen's staunchest supporters turned on her, unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the reality laid bare before them. Tears streamed down faces as neighbors confronted the depth of betrayal they'd endured. One woman stood up, trembling with emotion, and accused Karen of ruining her marriage after constant harassment led to financial strain and arguments at home. Another man recounted how he'd nearly lost his business due to unexpected fines imposed by the HOA under Karen's watch. For Sarah and Mark, watching the unraveling of Karen's empire was both satisfying and surreal. They'd dreamed of this moment, the day when accountability would triumph over corruption, but it didn't bring the closure they'd hoped for. Instead, it left a bitter taste in their mouths, a reminder of how easily trust could be shattered and how fragile human connections truly were. As the meeting drew to a close, the HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. Cheers erupted from the crowd, mingling with tears of relief and vindication. Yet Karen, seated stiffly at the edge of the room, showed no sign of remorse. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes burned with defiance. As she gathered her belongings and walked out, escorted by security guards, she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "You'll regret this." Her words lingered in the air, casting a shadow over the victory. Though Karen was gone, her influence still lingered, a toxic residue that would take time to scrub clean. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what the future held. Would the neighborhood heal, or would the scars remain forever? Sarah and Mark left the meeting feeling drained but hopeful. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they weren't alone. Slowly but surely, the community was coming together, not to rebuild what Karen had destroyed, but to create something new, something stronger, something built on transparency, fairness, and mutual respect. As they drove home, Sarah glanced at Mark and smiled faintly. "Do you think we'll ever look back on this and laugh?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe. But for now, let's just focus on surviving." And survive they would. Because despite the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty, they'd proven that even in the darkest moments, light could break through, if only you were willing to fight for it. The weeks following Karen's removal from the HOA presidency felt like a strange mix of relief and unease. The neighborhood, once paralyzed by her iron grip, was slowly beginning to breathe again. But it wasn't an easy process. Old wounds took time to heal, and trust didn't return overnight. For Sarah and Mark, life had become a balancing act, celebrating small victories while navigating the lingering fallout of their battle against corruption. Karen may have been stripped of her title, but she refused to fade into obscurity. Instead, she became a ghost haunting the edges of the community. Her lawyer filed appeals and counterclaims, dragging out legal proceedings in an attempt to muddy the waters. She even started a petition to reinstate herself as HOA president, though few signed it beyond her closest allies. Still, her presence loomed large, casting a shadow over every effort to rebuild. Despite these challenges, something remarkable began to happen. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact or whispered behind closed doors started reaching out to one another. Conversations that had been stifled for years finally came to the surface. People admitted they'd always felt uneasy under Karen's leadership, but hadn't known how to speak up. Now, with her gone, they felt emboldened to share their stories and to dream of a better way forward. Sarah and Mark found themselves at the center of this newfound momentum. Though they never sought to be leaders, their courage inspired others to take action. A group of residents formed a committee dedicated to reforming the HOA, drafting new guidelines focused on transparency and inclusivity. Meetings were held openly, with agendas posted online days in advance so everyone could participate. Votes were conducted fairly, and decisions were made collectively rather than dictated by a single person. One evening, during a community gathering, in the park, Sarah stood before a crowd of neighbors, her voice steady despite the knot of nerves in her stomach. "We've all been through a lot," she began, glancing around at familiar faces. "But tonight I want us to focus not on what we've lost, but on what we can build together." Her words resonated deeply. People nodded, some wiping away tears, others clapping softly in agreement. Mark watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. He remembered the early days of their fight, the fear, the threats, the sleepless nights, and marveled at how far they'd come. This ragtag group of neighbors, once divided by suspicion and resentment, was now united by a shared vision of hope. Slowly but surely, changes began to take root. The HOA board welcomed fresh faces, including younger families and longtime residents eager to contribute positively. Monthly meetings transformed from tense interrogations into lively discussions about improving the community. Ideas flowed freely, installing solar-powered streetlights, organizing seasonal festivals, creating a shared garden space where neighbors could grow vegetables together. Even simple gestures like painting murals on drab walls or planting flower beds along sidewalks brought color and life back to the neighborhood. For Sarah, the most rewarding change was seeing friendships blossom where none had existed before. Parents chatted while their children played on swings. Elderly couples invited newcomers over for coffee. Block parties returned, louder and livelier than ever, with laughter echoing through the streets late into the night. It was as if the weight of Karen's reign had lifted, allowing people to reconnect with one another in ways they hadn't realized they'd missed. Still, reminders of the past lingered. The graffiti on Sarah and Mark's garage door had been painted over, but faint outlines remained beneath the fresh coat of paint. Their garden, once vibrant and thriving, bore scars from the vandalism. It would take months, maybe years, for it to fully recover. Yet instead of letting these reminders drag them down, Sarah and Mark chose to see them as symbols of resilience. They replanted their rose bushes, nurturing them with care, determined to watch them bloom again. Karen's legal battles continued to simmer in the background, but her influence waned with each passing day. The court eventually ruled against her, ordering her to repay the embezzled funds, a task that proved impossible given the extent of her financial mismanagement. Stripped of her assets and ostracized by nearly everyone she'd once controlled, Karen quietly moved away, leaving behind only rumors and speculation about where she'd gone. Though her departure marked the end of an era, it also signaled the beginning of a new chapter. Without her toxic presence, the neighborhood blossomed in unexpected ways. Residents embraced collaboration over control, working side by side to create a community that reflected their values. Children learned the importance of kindness and teamwork, watching their parents model behavior rooted in empathy and understanding. Slowly, the scars of the scandal faded, replaced by bonds stronger than anyone thought possible. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah sat on her porch, sipping tea and watching leaves swirl in the breeze. Mark joined her, holding a plate of cookies he'd baked earlier that morning. "You know," he said after a moment of silence, "I think we did it." Sarah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Yeah, We really did. They sat there for a while, taking in the beauty of their surroundings. The garden, though still healing, showed signs of renewal. New shoots peeked through the soil, promising future blooms. Across the street, a group of kids laughed as they chased each other around, their joy infectious. Down the block, a neighbor waved as he walked his dog, calling out a cheerful greeting. It wasn't perfect. Life rarely was, but it was enough. For Sarah and Mark, the chaos of the past year had taught them valuable lessons about strength, perseverance, and the power of unity. They'd faced darkness head-on and emerged stronger because of it. And while they knew challenges lay ahead, they also knew they weren't alone. Together, with their neighbors, they had built something worth fighting for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This place, this quirky, imperfect, beautiful neighborhood, was home. Not because of its manicured lawns or pristine rules, but because of the people who called it theirs. Through trials and triumphs, they had proven that even the smallest acts of courage could spark monumental change. And somewhere in the quiet moments between laughter and conversation, Sarah and Mark realized they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for all along, a community that felt like family.